समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Can we say that peace has broken out in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia? Or can we say that no, peace has not broken out? Both are wrong. If he said either, it would be wrong. The correct thing to say is some kind of peace has broken out or seems to be breaking out between Russia and Ukraine. In fact, I could say as much as I could stick my neck out and say that indeed some kind of a peace has broken out. It's a very limited peace. This happened after the long phone call, about 2 hours, between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, old friends. You remember the Helsinki summit of 2018. Strongmen like fellow strongmen. So they had this long call, at the end of which they decided something that a lot of people in the American media and the Western media see as a rebuff or as a loss of face to Donald Trump, but Donald Trump and his people would see it as a victory, or at least the beginning, early steps to a victory. Victory is not one country over the other, but victory just to establish a full ceasefire right now, because the expectation is minimalistic. It is not maximalistic, which is something that both Trump and Putin like to set up their politics and their diplomacy and their strategic thinking around. It's not like that. Right now, the ask is minimal, which is a full ceasefire. However, that has not been met. What we have is a very partial qualified ceasefire. Qualified ceasefire, again, there is a little nuance if you read the Russian readout or the American readout of the call. If you read the Russian readout, it would look like that this 30-day ceasefire is about not attacking each other's energy infrastructure. In fact, in one place it suggests energy and infrastructure, but some ambiguity remains there. However, I believe that Russians would prefer for it to be energy and infrastructure. And in a minute, I will tell you why. The American readout also, if you read it, it says energy infrastructure, and that both sides readout say that both sides will also now get into negotiations, technical talks to ensure that there is freedom of navigation in Black Sea. Now, Black Sea, Black Sea is where a lot of the surplus grain produced by both Russia and Ukraine, but a lot more by Ukraine. Ukraine is the surplus bread basket. Other countries may produce a lot more grain, a lot more wheat, and a lot more sunflower oil than Ukraine, but Ukraine has the surpluses. So if Ukraine is not able to send that out, then global prices go up, and many countries, particularly Africa, Egypt, among the big populous countries, those suffer greatly, and wheat prices, sunflower oil prices go up, everybody gets affected. So restore freedom of navigation in Black Sea. That is the ask right now. And that's happened between Putin and Trump. And then the idea is that you go forward. Each side is now setting up a group of empowered experts to talk and negotiate the route to a more permanent and a more comprehensive ceasefire. While I record this, as I am recording this, a phone call is taking place between Zelensky and Donald Trump. So if something happens, something comes up while I'm recording, I will update it. But I think you could still make a wager that at this point Zelensky will generally agree with what Trump tells him, because he knows the consequences of arguing with Trump. He tried doing so just the other day, and we saw on cameras exactly what happened. Trump told him, you are playing with Third World War, etc. And he also got admonished by J.D. Vance, the vice president, and then he was effectively thrown out of the White House. The Americans withdrew their aid and also stopped sharing intelligence after that. That was restored later after talks in Saudi Arabia between top delegations on both sides, in this case America and Ukraine, where Ukraine agreed to a full ceasefire, and that's when the Americans restored military aid and also intelligence sharing. Given that background, I find it unlikely that Zelensky will say no to what's on offer. Now, what's on offer? If you check out the Russian readout, and there is a para there which is telltale. That para says the leaders confirmed their intention to continue efforts aimed at reaching a settlement in Ukraine bilaterally, with due regard in particular to the aforementioned proposals by the US President. For this purpose, a Russian and an American expert task forces are now being formed. That is for securing safe navigation in Black Sea. Now, see that word used here, bilateral. Bilateral between who? In India, we say that Kashmir is an issue that must be solved bilaterally between Pakistan and India, which means that no third party has a role. No America, no Russia, no China, no OIC, no nobody, no UN, no Security Council. After Shimla Accord, this is to be settled bilaterally. Bilaterally means between two antagonists, that is India and Pakistan in this case. Can you imagine a situation where two other countries, or maybe one out of India and Pakistan and another superpower in the world, say that we are discussing this issue bilaterally and coming up and deciding on a solution, say on the Kashmir issue. I'm giving you an extreme example. I just want to make the point that bilateral usually applies to the two countries involved in a dispute, the two antagonists. In this case, this is different. One country is an antagonist. That country is not even a winner of the war, definitely not yet. The other country is actually a supporter of the second antagonist. So that country enters into negotiation with the invader, and then the invader says that this will be settled bilaterally between us and between the Americans. तो मेरे को मालूम है तेरा बाप कौन है, मैं तेरे से बात नहीं करूँगा, मैं तेरे बाप से बात करूँगा. I will not talk with you, I will talk with your big daddy, which in this case is Donald Trump's America. So that expression bilateral is very important. And even if you see the American readout and further commentary from the American side, statements that American officials have made, all of these indicate that these negotiations will now go on between the American side and the Russian side. Ukrainians will not be a part of it. Now, this is just about a week after the big summit of many friendly nations, mostly European nations, in London that Keir Starmer had hosted, where they said that there should not be any settlement to the Ukraine issue without the participation of Ukraine, without Ukraine being on the table. However, it seems right now that these first steps indicate that ideas are being discussed while keeping Ukraine out of the negotiations. There's no better way to understand this. Maybe it's a rude way to understand this, but there is no better way to understand this than reading this tweet by Dmitry Medvedev. Dmitry Medvedev, as we know, has been Prime Minister of Russia, has been the President of Russia. He's the one with whom Putin once flipped places because Putin's constitution didn't let him carry on being president for more than 2 terms. So he became Prime Minister, made Medvedev his president. Same Medvedev, right now he's deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation. So see his tweet. His Twitter handle is very juicy and very spicy and very rude also to Europeans. Ukrainians, of course, he treats Ukrainians like, you will just see as I go on with this episode of Cut The Clutter, you will see what he thinks of Ukrainians. That's what Putin's Russians think of Ukrainians. So his latest tweet, after the phone call between Putin and Trump, he says, and you can read the tweet on your screens, the phone call between Presidents Putin and Trump proved a well-known idea. There is only Russia and America in the dining room. That's what he means by bilateral. There is only Russia and America in the dining room. On the menu, light appetizer, Brussels sprouts. Do you know why Brussels? Because that's the capital of EU. On the menu, light appetizer, Brussels sprouts, British fish and chips, and Paris rooster. The main course is Kyiv-style cutlet. Enjoy your meal. So rude but very effective. That is what the Russians mean. And in this case, also the Americans mean when they say they are discussing the fate of Ukraine in this war, at least up to the ceasefire, in a bilateral manner. One is an antagonist in the war, the other isn't. The other probably indirectly was until they were backing Ukraine, because Biden had said that US will back Ukraine for as long as it takes. That situation is now over. Just about 2 weeks back, the US voted alongside Russia and broke rank with its own NATO allies, while India and China abstained. But America voted with Russia on a resolution at UN General Assembly on Ukraine. That is something that also the Russian statement notes now. And you know what? Just as we had suspected, the Zelensky-Trump call has ended. We don't have the details yet, but Trump has tweeted or written on Truth Social that he had a very productive hour-long conversation, and looks like the peace process that they had initiated is on track. You can see therefore that the presumption that we had made at the beginning of this episode has turned out to be correct. There is going to be this limited ceasefire. Now, there is some evidence that some peace has broken out, because as part of this phone call and conversations was also an idea that both sides exchange a certain number of prisoners. So as we speak, and that is something that's a parallel track of negotiations and talks that's being carried out in the Middle East. You remember that last round of talks between the Ukrainians and the Americans was in Saudi Arabia. So that one, and this is brokered mostly by UAE, that has led to another exchange of prisoners, 175 from either side, and Russia has also made a gesture, quote unquote, in releasing 22 severely wounded Ukrainian prisoners. Now, as this call ended and as this decision or direction was announced, subject to the acceptance by Zelensky, air raid sirens went up in Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine. Some places, particularly Sloviansk, the town of Sloviansk, they were hit by Russian missiles and drones. At the same time, the Russians kept on pushing on the ground to get the Ukrainians out of their territory in Kursk. They are now making some gains there, because Donald Trump almost let it be known that he does not appreciate Ukrainians holding Russian territory there. But Ukrainians, also being pesky as they are, at the same time opened another front on the Belgorod side into the Russian mainland to also reduce pressure on Kursk. So those bits of fighting are going on. However, attacks on each other's energy infrastructure so far haven't taken place since this call. Now, there are two views on this. One is that, look, this is a bit of a favor, because Ukrainians were taking a real battering, a real pummeling of their energy infrastructure. At the same time, a lot of what Ukraine had to lose by way of its energy infrastructure has already been lost, because Zelensky claims 80% of his energy infrastructure has been hit. Maybe not that much, or maybe he's been able to make some of it operational again, but quite a bit of it is hit. Lately, what's happened, however, is that Ukraine has been using some long-range drones, and also Ukraine has now come up. Ukraine has a lot of technical capability in the area of drones, missiles, aeronautics, aircraft manufacture. So Ukraine has now built or developed a 1,000-kilometer range in Neptune missile, a version of its much-used Neptune missile, up to the 1,000-kilometer range. So Ukraine has displayed or flaunted these capabilities. Just on March 14, it used probably a Neptune missile to blow up a big Russian refinery in a place called Tuapse, which is 480 kilometers deeper from the front line. So Russians have felt this pain also. So they also have an incentive of stopping mutually these attacks on each other's energy infrastructure, because now Ukraine also has some capability. That's one view. I'm not subscribing to that view, but that is one view. Now again, if you read both the statements, you see other nuancial differences, although neither side has contradicted the other. So we take both of these to be correct. The Russian readout says, the Russian statement says that the Russian side emphasized that for any durable, comprehensive ceasefire to take place, one, Ukraine has to stop mobilization of troops for its forces, or forced mobilization it has to stop, or conscription it has to stop. Second, its Western friends have to stop supplying it both arms and also intelligence. That is a maximalist position, because ultimately what is Putin's idea? Putin's idea is he should keep what he has by way of territory and reduce Ukraine's sovereignty in such a way that Russia exercises great influence there, and anybody who rules Ukraine knows that they have no agency of their own, and definitely they have no Western allies on whose strength they can counter, if not fight, Putin. They pretty much become a vassal state of Russia. That, however, is a demand for the next stage that the Russians have put out. Similarly, something that appears in the American statement but not in the Russian one. Russian statement says that the two leaders discussed the situation in the Middle East and the possibilities where they could collaborate. But the American statement clearly says, and I'm reading from it, they further discussed the need to stop proliferation of strategic weapons and will engage with others to ensure the broadest possible application. This refers to Iran, obviously, because the next sentence is, the two leaders shared the view that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. This is in the American statement. In this detail, not in the Russian statement, but the Russians have not contradicted it. After these statements, Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, he spoke to journalists outside the White House's West Wing, and he said shuttle diplomacy is challenging, it's tough, but talks are going on. They are now trying to tie in other ends, but the fact is that if Trump had started out thinking that he will get a full 30-day ceasefire, that has not happened. So even as the two sides stop firing missiles at each other's energy plants or oil refineries, the battle on the ground, the fighting on the ground goes on. So the death in the trenches, which Donald Trump has been talking about preventing, that death will continue in the trenches. At the same time, there is no restriction on the Russians either attacking Kyiv's military centers or Kyiv's civilian targets, hospitals, whatever they want. It is this restriction is only on energy infrastructure, and it is mutual. Now, in all of this, while this works out bilaterally, who are the people who are left out? Zelensky will still be consulted. But what has Zelensky been told? The message to Zelensky is, you are on your own. Even though we may not be with Putin, that's what the Americans are saying, we may still be with you, but Europeans are not with you, don't count on them. So once again, the understanding of this situation we get from Medvedev. So let me read his second tweet for you. I will read one more after that. His second tweet, he says, Macron and Starmer are playing dumb. Time and again they are told the peacemakers must be from non-NATO states. No, we will send tens of thousands. Just lay it out. You want to give military aid to neo-Nazi in Kyiv? That means war with NATO. So once again, Medvedev is giving you the Russian understanding that if Britain and France send their troops to be kind of a tripwire between the two forces like peacekeepers, they will still have the protection of Article 5 of NATO, which means any attack on them will be seen as an attack on NATO. And that's what Medvedev is saying, that we are not so stupid. You are trying to play that game. Don't play that game with us. And he says, consult with Trump, scumbags, right? And finally, once again, because one side is talking so much and so much freely, American side talks. At this point, they might be a little more restrained because they have made political investment in getting some kind of a resolution in this situation, because Trump had made an early promise that once he gets elected, first of all, something that he repeats all the time, at least once a day, if not twice, that had he been president and had the election not been stolen from me, this war would never have started. The second thing that he's been saying is that when I come to power, within 24 hours, the war will stop. The war hasn't stopped. Now he says that was said in a manner of speaking. So if I may translate this in terms of Indian political lexicon, this was Trump's jumla, right? That he will stop the war in 24 hours. But he still has to show some results. So his message also to Ukrainians is that you are out of it. Let me deal with Russia. This is between big boys, not for you. That's why the Russians are being much more upfront here because they were stalemated. In any war, if the bigger power is stalemated, then that bigger power is losing the war. That bigger power is not winning the war. Smaller power at least has the satisfaction that I have a fraction of the armed strength of those guys, but I have stalemated them. They are not moving. For the Russians, this is almost like victory, which Trump is delivering to them. So that's why, again, I read Medvedev's words. He says the Trump administration no longer wants to feed the Nazi mutt in Kyiv. Mutt is like a mongrel. The Trump administration no longer wants to feed the Nazi mutt in Kyiv. I told you earlier that I will tell you in the words of Medvedev what Russians think of Ukrainians. So this is a Nazi mutt, right? So see the use of the expression mutt, a stray dog, a mongrel, whatever, however you describe it. The flea-ridden dog was picked up by a decrepit Europe. Again, see the description, a flea-ridden dog for Ukrainians. The flea-ridden dog was picked up by a decrepit Europe, joyfully exclaiming, "My doggy, it's no use. The mad parasitic dog is dangerous, so better to put it down quietly." You know what it means when you say put down a dog. So better to put it down quietly without any suffering. Dixie, D-I-X-I. So for a moment I thought this was something that was misspelled or something until I figured Dixie is Latin for I have spoken. So the Russians at this point are claiming some kind of a victory, and I think they're within their rights to claim a victory because the adversary who they had invaded and who had stalemated them, he's now been abandoned by his main allies. And those main allies, the big daddy of the main allies is now dictating to Ukraine what kind of peace it should have. That is where we stand right now. It's also a very important message and lesson for many countries around the world, including for a country like India, that in future, God forbid there is any conflict, can you count on anybody? You can't count on anybody because once a precedent is set, that precedent can be repeated, in fact, will be repeated. So if you have a key ally in any conflict, that ally could tomorrow walk off and say, listen, you are only able to fight this war because I am helping you, or in any case, you are fighting this war effectively because I am helping you. I will not help you any longer unless you accept the terms of peace and settlement that I am advising you to accept and that I have negotiated with your enemy. So that's the message from all that. It's a very significant turn in international strategic relations, almost a little bit like the Conference of Yalta in 1945, when the three winners of the Second World War, that is Roosevelt, who was quite sick by then, Stalin and Churchill got together and drew the new maps of Europe and divided it between the Eastern Bloc and Western Bloc. Something like that might be happening with Ukraine now. It is something that every country in the world which has antagonists on its borders or which has territorial disputes with bigger powers, especially India, they have to take notice.